Cilian decided his master should keep pressuring his daughters and asked that no one be allowed to see him. Recap Manhwa Alberto made another attempt and told the prince he was stubborn and wouldn't go and that he couldn't stop his reckless behavior. Suddenly, our heroine interrupted the conversation and said the best defense is a good offense. The prince asked Juliet to repeat what she had said, and then the girl explained that if you're always on the defense, eventually it's gonna break down. Our heroine said that since the count was so stubborn in his efforts to get what he wanted, it meant he wasn't gonna quit until he got it. And she told the prince that before his defense got wrecked, he better make sure it didn't come to that. Alberto asked the maid how she dared to give advice to the prince, but Cilian accepted her words and told the butler he did well. The prince then ordered the butler to go in and tell the count that he had gone to bed early from exhaustion and added that if the count tried to sneak out, they'd take him away and accuse him of disobeying an imperial family member's order. Alberto at this point thought he had a rough job and loudly said he'd follow the order. Then the prince turned to our heroine while the girl anxiously awaited her fate. She heard the prince's proposal to sleep together, and it sounded both voluntary and forced. In the end, our heroine found herself in the same room as the prince where calm reigned between them, and the girl wondered what was going through that man's head. Finally, Juliet couldn't take it and told the prince that wasn't the way to do things and then asked to be replaced by a guard waiting outside. Cilian replied that he had a maid so trustworthy she'd cover him with her whole body in an emergency and told her not to worry about anything. Then he asked our heroine to take off her glasses because they might break. While she slept, little by little, Juliet started understanding what he meant and thought she shouldn't worry, being the trusted maid she was. Then she took off her glasses, thinking it had been months since she last wore them during the theater, and she figured he probably didn't remember. Among other things, the girl felt super uncomfortable, sleeping with an iron corset and couldn't stop tossing and turning in bed, wondering what other suffering she'd have to endure because of that prince. Suddenly, our heroine heard the prince ask her to stop tossing and turning so she could sleep, after which he asked if she was expecting anything else tonight. Juliet gasped at the prince's words, and he thought he should tell Alberto he didn't need to look for another maid anymore because now he was sure he wouldn't find a girl so funny who hated him. When our heroine fell into a deep sleep, the prince heard the count had returned to his room and asked the girl to wake up. But she was sleeping soundly, and the prince wondered what she could be dreaming about since she didn't even answer his call. As a result, our heroine woke up to a strange noise and heard the prince asking her to turn on the light, after which she saw that woman screaming and then fainting. Juliet asked the prince if he really wanted to have fun at night, but he told her he needed to fix this misunderstanding ASAP. Overall, all the dirty work fell back on our heroine's shoulders, and she reached out to revive the brave stranger. Juliet grabbed the shoulder of this nighttime visitor and told him if he didn't wake up now, they'd both be dead. When the girl finally regained consciousness, she ran to the prince and begged him to hold her because she was eager to see him. Our heroine was outraged that this person had lost all fear and wondered if the girl couldn't see the prince's expression. He looked at Juliet and asked why she was standing there, then told her to leave the room and immediately invite Albert in. Our heroine turned to the girl and said she'd accompany her out, but she got mad and said she was actually talking to His Majesty. This shameless lady even dared to hit our heroine because she suddenly decided to interfere in their conversation. But Juliet dodged the blow, which only made the stranger more pissed off. Our girl was basically saying it was just a reflex. But then she thought there was nothing wrong with an aristocrat slapping her. Juliet was ready to take the hit. But the room went dead silent when the prince caught the girl's hand and turned to our girl, telling her she didn't need to take a hit from that person. Then the prince asked Juliet who she was, and heard back that she was Prince Cilian's personal maid. Then he confirmed it and stressed that this girl had barged into his room without permission and even tried to hit him. After that, the prince figured the midnight visitor must want him dead, and he told Cilian just that. Cilian had already asked out loud if anyone was outside. Sleepy Albert came running down the hall wondering what the hell was going on. The prince then remembered the assistant, who had asked not to be disturbed while in that place, and then asked Albert how that girl got into his room dressed like that. Cilian also asked his aide how she passed security looking like that, and even suggested, sounding annoyed, that maybe it was just a weird disguise for a mercenary, to which Albert just apologized. The prince then hoped his aide had told the count that disobeying his orders would be considered straight-up treason. Cilian declared that entering his room against orders was nothing less than an assassination attempt, and then ordered everyone at the inn to be captured. Count Vaden was already there and started explaining to the prince that it was just a huge misunderstanding. The guy said his dumb daughter had messed up because she was in love with His Highness and begged for forgiveness. The prince then told the count he hadn't been touched because he didn't know anything, but the count said he didn't get what was being said. Cilian then told him he knew the count was playing both sides between the first prince and himself, and suggested that if his plan went down tonight, he'd be betraying Francisco the first prince. Cilian admitted to the count that even though the emperor backed him, he wasn't interested in the crown prince title, and unlike him, his brother was actively gathering strength and power. The guy begged again for mercy and said he had been misunderstood. Then the prince stared hard at him and said unfortunately he didn't know much about him. Cilian announced to the guy that up until now he'd only been warning him, and then stressed that not only had they dared to enter his room but also dared to lay hands on his maid. Now all eyes were on today's main character, and everyone was sure that, judging by the girl's look, the prince was just protecting her because she was probably doing a good job. The count asked the prince why he was so mad over a maid, The guy said, since his daughter wanted to hit the girl, there had to be a reason, and then said that even if not, the count's daughter had the right to put a commoner in her place. But the last thing the count said hit a nerve, and the prince angrily asked how they dared be rude to someone serving a member of the imperial family. Meanwhile, Albert kept wondering how our girl could even like the prince. He decided to ask the prince to put off the talk until morning and reminded him they had to leave super early, so they needed to get some sleep. Cilian said that's what they'd do, and added that before making his decision, the count and his daughter should personally apologize to his maid. Of course, everyone there was pissed off that they had to apologize to our girl, who to them was just a maid, and they told the prince that he stressed it was because of their arrogance they'd lost control, and the prince said their arrogance even outdid his, and then asked the count if he wasn't going to take the crown prince spot. Meanwhile, our girl wondered what the hell she had to do with any of this, and what had she done wrong. As a result, Juliet got an apology from Count Baden. At that moment, our heroine surprised herself, thinking that thanks to that stubborn prince, she was being treated like a human being. The girl also noticed to herself that in the end, she didn't even let them hit her, and concluded that she was kind of grateful to this guy. The next day in the carriage, the prince asked our heroine again to make him tea at some point, but she was surely asleep. Cilian wondered how it was possible that his master was there awake and she was calmly asleep finally. The prince found an explanation for her behavior. They had gone to bed late the night before and she was uncomfortable. He decided not to mess with the girl's rest and pulled out his miracle thermos from that awful pocket. He kept in his underwear. Our heroine woke up the moment the prince untied her cloak. Juliet yelled at Cilian, asking what he was doing, and he answered that he just wanted to take out a bottle and pour himself some tea. Then the young man angrily asked the girl if she wanted to die, raising his voice, and explained that he had called her several times and she had been ignoring him without mercy. Our heroine replied that she was surprised to see him lurking around and taking off her clothes, and asked him to shake her shoulder next time to wake her up. Juliet asked the prince what his obsession with this tea was and was asked to repeat her question. Our heroine said she hadn't said anything and tried to drop the subject. When they arrived at the next stop, the girl got out of the carriage, thinking she hated those long rides. Suddenly a young man approached her and said his name was Games and he was happy to help her. But our heroine told him firmly she didn't need his help, and he asked her name in Games' eyes. This girl was the kind of person the prince valued, and he thought since she was ugly, she'd be easy to seduce, and figured he wouldn't mind making those connections. The young man decided to go ahead with his plan and complimented Juliet's beautiful eyes, but she got mad because she knew they weren't even visible through her glasses. Games defended himself, saying he really couldn't see their color, but if he looked closely, he was sure they were pretty, and thought she was dumb for not recognizing the compliments. And the next moment, Juliet heard him say it was the first time he'd seen such small and awful eyes, which on the other hand were pretty. Albert approached the prince and said he had brought pajamas that would fit our heroine well, and asked why he was doing it. Cilian answered that when he asked the girl yesterday why she slept in the clothes she wore at work, she told him she'd never had pajamas in her life. The prince also suggested that our heroine would probably cry with gratitude to her kind and generous master, but the man mentally noted that the young knight had never paid so much attention to his services before while with this girl. He treated her very differently. The prince also asked the butler how long he'd have to wait to get his things, and the butler replied he'd help our heroine now. But the prince said he'd do it himself, even though he didn't understand why Juliet was late. While they always had the same stuff already downstairs, the prince saw our heroine with Games, who greeted the prince and said he was in charge of her protection. Then Cilian responded that he remembered the same night yesterday, and anyone who dared invade his bedroom he'd fire and exile. Games reminded the prince that he had ordered them not to stay at the door of his bedroom, but got no answer. Our heroine soon found out she now had pajamas for that night, after which the prince asked Juliet to be even more loyal and added that it wasn't often you found such a generous host like him. Cilian emphasized how grateful and moved our heroine was by his attentions, so he let her change now, even though it was still pretty early for bedtime. But Juliet mentally declared she'd never been touched at all. When she went to the bathroom, she realized she couldn't put on the pajamas while wearing the iron corset, and decided that this obsessed prince was obviously enjoying mocking her. Our heroine was desperate because she was already hot and now had to wear this ugly thick padded dress. But she had no choice, so she soon peeked out and told the prince she had changed. Cilian examined her and finally asked why her belly had gotten even more protruding. Juliet then admitted she wore a corset during the day to look more delicate. But to be honest, she couldn't say that the shape of her iron corset and the cut of this winter dress were even slightly different, so she had to improvise. The prince thought the corset was uncomfortable to wear, and then he found himself wanting to see her expression but couldn't see her eyes through the thick glasses. In the end, the prince decided that once they reached their final destination, he'd immediately go see the dwarf craftsman to get some normal glasses made, so he could see her eyes. And then he remembered the guy downstairs and thought that even in this form, this girl had all kinds of pests crawling everywhere. Cilian stopped to think that as a kind master, he wouldn't put this innocent maiden in danger on the way. Our heroine caught up on the prince's affairs and shared her opinion that Austin's jewelry stores are now overflowing with gems, so the idea of opening another outlet wouldn't succeed. The girl then claimed that if he wanted to keep growing the jewelry business, he needed to find unique jewels to grab the public's attention. After hearing her, the prince asked to stop the carriage and invite Albert in Cilian told his assistant that before reaching Rickaland, they had to stop at a town with a big jewelry store. The prince said that although Adam was skeptical about developing a jewelry business, his gut told him they shouldn't give up now. Recap Manhwa. Our heroine thought that if he always worked like this, it was clear why he was stressed and had such an unpleasant personality. Juliet thought he'd grown up surrounded by luxury, love, and care, and then had to find himself an extra headache. Finally, she thought that now that she'd found an excuse for his attitude, and could be patient, she asked out loud if he wanted to have tea. The prince suspiciously asked what she was up to. At that moment, Juliet realized their suspicions were pretty much the same. The girl replied that he always had tea at that hour, so today she was just being proactive. Then the prince said it'd be fine if someone stretched their legs, but since no one else was in the carriage, it was clear who had to do it. Juliet immediately realized her slip-up and learned once again that taking initiative gets you punished, and enthusiasm too. The next moment, the carriage jolted hard and the miracle thermos slipped from her hands, and she freaked out realizing the bottle was worth more than her life. The prince called her dumb and told her it was dangerous to jump like that during a jolt. But what happened was this situation caused another embarrassing moment, where our heroine ended up in the prince's arms. As a result, Juliet had to ask His Highness to let go of her grip while wondering how her iron corset was holding up. The prince declared he hadn't hired a maid but probably some kind of fraud, then asked her straight up who she was. Now, our heroine had an idea. She had to explain something to the prince immediately because she'd really messed up. The prince was already angrily thinking she'd been lying to him the whole time, then grabbed her glasses and asked if those were fake too. Cilian shouted from inside to get the carriage fixed immediately. Albert tried to get in and help his master, eager to see if he was okay, but the assistants heard they weren't to open the door. And then the prince ordered them to get everything in order immediately and get moving. Cilian had already told the girl he could see she'd prepared carefully for her task by putting an iron corset around her waist and some padding on her arms. Of course, our heroine was so surprised at her disguise. Caught by the prince, who was left speechless and figured he was impressed, Juliet thought it didn't even matter how she died now. So she started wondering why she had to humiliate herself in front of that dude, and meanwhile the prince straight up asked her, who sent her? Juliet told herself she had nothing to fear since she hadn't done anything that bad. The girl pulled herself together and said, no one sent her, just that she needed a job, and she asked a friend who hooked her up with a gig on the estate. Our heroine told the prince she was recommended by Marcus Rhodius and added that if he doubted her, he could ask his brother. Cilian noticed Juliet's state and thought to himself, she was too clumsy to be a spy, but still his doubts kept bugging him, and he asked her to explain the whole charade. Then our heroine told him she'd been orphaned in her old age and had spent her whole life in the theater. The prince also learned that the theater was a dangerous place for a girl without a guardian, so for her own safety she had to change her look. Our heroine also admitted she didn't know what kind of job awaited her at the new place, so because of her excitement, she decided to leave things as they were and got the job that way, sincerely hoping he wouldn't remember the wine spill incident at the theater. Cilian thought that even for a refined beauty connoisseur like himself, this girl was pretty cute and figured she'd probably stand out to regular folks. The prince immediately remembered the skinny knight who'd been lurking around our heroine yesterday. In the end, the young man said he was willing to keep up the charade. Our heroine was surprised by this and said since he'd figured everything out, there was no need to keep going. And honestly, she really wanted to finally wear comfy clothes. The prince replied that she was probably already used to her image, so no need to change anything, and asked her before going to bed to take off anything that might keep her from sleeping well. While our heroine wondered what situation she was in, the prince hit her with that he was too generous with his servants. They arrived at the next spot late at night because of an incident with the carriage earlier that day. Albert was extra pissed. Since they were running late, but he was whining quietly, he figured the prince was mad about it, so he didn't even want to go to his room. The aide showed up to ask His Highness if he'd called for him, but the prince just gave him a questioning look. Albert was even more shocked when he saw the prince waiting for our heroine. And when he saw her, he told the girl not to keep him waiting like yesterday, but to move her legs and get up to his room. Now the prince thought he'd have to watch over our heroine so no creepy dudes would latch onto her. He didn't want his hard-working servant snatched by some horny guy. Albert couldn't believe what he was seeing, nor that the prince was in a good mood after a long trip in a broken carriage. After the water formalities, the prince said he was super tired and everyone needed rest and didn't add anything else because he couldn't. Our heroine had just stepped into the room and asked if he was going to sleep. The prince was stunned and speechless, and our heroine told him she wanted to apologize for having prepared his pajamas specifically for her disguised size, so now they were a bit big on him. A minute later, his assistant knocked on the prince's door and asked if he was asleep. Albert told the prince that Count Adam had arrived and wanted to talk to him. As soon as our heroine reached for the door to open it, the prince shoved her aside and asked where she was going like that, then seriously explained that in her current form, she could only walk around his bedroom in his presence and out of his sight. The prince then said he'd go see the butler himself and told her to change clothes and come out. Our heroine also heard the warning that if she showed her true form to others, he wouldn't let her get away with it. Albert heard some noises coming from the room but didn't get why no one was opening the door, so the dude decided to step in and see what was up. But the prince swung the door open and snapped that he'd be out soon, telling him to wait outside. Finally, Cilian and Adam had their face-off. And it's key to say that Adam wasn't just the prince's assistant but also a childhood homie. When Cilian said there was no rush, Adam said he actually wanted to check out the mine and meet the jeweler himself. And he explained that's exactly why he came. He decided to roll with his boy in person. When the prince saw his assistant was about to step into his room, he freaked and blocked the butler's way, asking why he wanted in. Albert said he just wanted Juliet to prep the tea, but the butler was shook. That was so out of the ordinary. Seeing the prince up and about and Juliet already dreaming, but the prince clapped back that our heroine wasn't sleeping but changing clothes and ordered the other servants to serve the tea. Albert was straight up baffled by what he heard and didn't even have a comeback for a while. Then the prince hit him with a question. Nobody wants someone barging into their room when they're naked. The dude felt offended and asked why the prince banned him from entering when he had healed him himself and even changed his diapers. Then he added he was still banned from the prince's room, only when his wife was there, and right then the butler had a thought and frantically asked if our heroine had become his. Then the prince asked what dumb shit he was talking about, and when he realized his master was so interested in the maids, Albert admitted it was true that until now only the maids tried to seduce him. The dude also told the prince he'd been acting super weird lately. Albert reminded Cilian who he was, and said he was always watching out for Juliet, which was pretty sus. After that, the dude shouted he was down to ride or die for him, even lose his life, and then insisted the prince let him enter his room, even though the prince tried to stop Albert the next moment. The girl jumped out of the room on her own, asking why they were just standing there. Albert noticed our heroine had messy hair from sleeping and her clothes were still torn up and greasy. The butler immediately bowed to the prince, apologized, confessing it was probably his old age making him think weird stuff. The prince asked his assistant why he was apologizing and reacting like that. Our heroine thought that was enough. But then the prince saw the lining of her blouse peeking out from her chest and, scared the butler would see, ordered her to get back to her room ASAP and honestly just pushed her inside and slammed the door. Albert walked away thinking he'd worried for nothing, since it was clear the prince was mad about her look, sending her back to her room away from prying eyes. Watching all this, Adam started wondering why the prince cared so much about how his servants looked. Cilian kept guarding his room's door and told the count it was late and everyone needed to rest. He also stressed they'd talk about rest tomorrow. Adam wondered why the prince suddenly seemed so eager to ditch him and decided to ask if he wasn't curious why he'd come so early. Before he could get an answer, the count announced that yesterday the Marquis Anais, our heroine's dad, and his daughter had arrived in Ricaland. Adam reminded Cilian that last year at the winter banquet, they'd invited them to visit the Bertino Duchy. The count reminded the prince he said he'd finish his business around April and come back to his residence, then invited the Marquis to visit his estate, but the prince couldn't recall this, nor the Marquis's daughter, as the count told him. Adam replied that since they came invited by him, he couldn't say no. The count said that even if only the daughter came and announced she was in love, it would have been clearer since there wasn't a good explanation for the Marquis's visit. Cilian asked Adam to find out about the relationship between the Marquis and his relative, the Duke of Cellini, and especially to understand if they were still on bad terms. The prince also reminded them who was going to the Duke's mansion to join this year's summer hunt. Cilian found it sus and then added that the Marquis of Anais didn't seem like the type of guy who'd back his daughter's plan. The prince then told the count that he'd heard his urgent report and said he could head to his room since everyone needed rest. Adam wondered if his buddy was hyped to get to his room like the bed was covered in honey, and just wished him good night. The next day in the carriage, they asked our heroine how she dared to sit next to the prince and told her seat was supposed to be next to her fiancé. Just as Juliet was about to get off the carriage, the prince stopped her and asked how she planned to serve him outside. He also asked our heroine to stay by his side despite Adam's confused objection about how any random maiden could sit next to him. But the prince insisted Juliet stay by his side. Cilian asked his friend to get his own personal maid to take care of her and to keep his hands off his servants. The young man replied that unfortunately his subordinates had left early in the morning on an errand. Our heroine didn't get why those two were acting like that at all, and mentally begged them to just let her go. The battle ended with the prince's victory and our heroine stayed inside. But Adam's throat was dry and now he was asking the girl for water. Our heroine pulled out a water bottle and solemnly handed it to him. Adam indignantly asked our heroine if she was seriously offering him water straight from the bottle, then immediately asked the prince where he found this specimen who didn't know the rules of serving drinks. While Juliet was thinking about what was going on, the prince replied that when you're on a long trip, circumstances are different. Cilian also told the count that one of the servants drinking water straight from the bottle wouldn't kill anyone. Adam really didn't get what was happening to his friend and how the arrogant prince had turned so kind and noble. He knew the prince usually used the best service and the finest silverware when traveling, even ordering water from the palace and always bringing 2 huge barrels for his own use. Adam was aware that because of the prince's whims, several carriages constantly accompanied him to meet his needs, but what interested the count most was knowing what part of that plain maiden pleased his highness. Getting no answer, the young man decided to continue with his report and started doing so. The count said that this time Prince Francisco would also join the summer hunt. Cilian was surprised that his brother would go to the Bertino residence and even doubted it, but Adam said the info was legit and added that he had to attend the event even if he didn't want to meet Lady Anais. Cilian asked his friend to tell him the rest of the changes and then started talking about the second reason why he had to meet urgently with him yesterday. Adam reported to Cilian that according to Marquis Rodius, the Duke Hind's daughter was pregnant, and only a few people knew at that moment. Our heroine thought she'd only seen those stories on TV shows. Meanwhile, the prince kept getting updates and this time was told that Moira, who had been his favorite before, had now become Duke Hind's concubine. Cilian asked Adam who he was talking about and heard the complaint that he could forget the name of the woman who'd been in his bed and was reminded that Moira had been his official lover. But the prince replied he didn't remember who she was. Then our heroine reminded the prince that it had been exactly 2 months since that happened. Adam was shocked by the question of how that maiden knew such info. Juliet thought once again that her tongue was her enemy. The girl stated she had been in charge of Lady Moira's chambers at the Bertino estate and had served her. Adam asked how she had worked on the estate and if it had been tough. So our heroine replied that besides the hassle of escorting women outside the prince's room, she generally liked working there. Juliet said the prince was unmatched in every way, which was why her legs still hurt from having to wait so long standing guard at the door. Adam got really curious about those details and straight up asked if her friend was really that good in bed, to which our heroine said without a doubt, adding she didn't even know it could last that long. Juliet admitted that some nights even at dawn he'd come like 3 or 4 times, and in the end she concluded that the whole process was totally different from what she'd imagined before. Right then, the prince cut in hyped up and asked our heroine what she knew about it and how she knew the other ideas. Adam asked the prince why he was throwing such awkward questions at the girl and suggested that our heroine must have had her own experience to have anything to compare it to. Then Juliet said that in her past life, she'd seen a lot of stuff like that, so she was familiar with it in theory, even if she had no practice, but decided she could consider her observations enough, then thought, of course, recap manhwa, she couldn't say that out loud, so she just smiled and kept quiet. Adam was amazed at how impressed the prince was, and realized they'd been friends since childhood, but this was the first time he'd seen his friend's face like that. The count knew the prince always preferred to have a quick fling with a more or less suitable girl and end it fast. Now Adam couldn't believe that. Cilian was actually feeling embarrassed, and on top of that he saw his suspicions confirmed, especially since he also reacted to every word from that maiden. The count started to believe the prince was acting like a guy in love. Finally they reached the next stop, and were greeted by another knight. Our heroine also got off and now looked around, wondering what kind of shop this was. She concluded the vibe was similar to a hotel. Juliet nervously glanced at the prince and thought he was clearly losing it. In hindsight, she realized it had been inappropriate to share such personal info about the prince with someone else when she'd just meant to give him a simple compliment. Now she wondered when and how she should apologize, and was ready to beg on her knees. The prince noticed her anxiety and told her if she had something to say, it was better to say it now. Juliet admitted she'd crossed the line and said something she had no right to say. Our heroine promised she wouldn't make the same mistake again. Cilian said he and the count were good friends and close partners, so an apology wasn't necessary. The prince also asked the girl not to act like that in front of others. At that moment the butler approached and said that was exactly what the prince had asked him to do. Our heroine noticed the box and thought it looked like the ones she'd seen back in her theater days. She knew jewelry was used as stage props, but not with real stones, just ones that matched the dresses, and she was always interested in finding the right accessories. The prince asked our heroine to stay by his side and added that even though she was a maiden, she could help with her feminine eye. The master immediately got pissed, but now even Adam stepped up to defend our heroine and ordered him to obey the prince's command. The box was opened and our heroine was immediately stunned, declaring it would be beautiful to decorate her dress with such stones, but the girl was cut off in her explanation. Now she realized the place was indeed a jewelry store. Looking around the room, she thought no matter how you looked at it, this place didn't seem like an ordinary shop, and concluded that regardless of magic's presence, this place was way behind the modern world. The prince was outraged at his friend for treating his maiden like that. Adam asked the owner to show them a set of amethysts. The shopkeeper replied they weren't in high demand, so he hadn't had time to prepare them. The prince knew the Bertino Duchy was a major producer of amethysts, and now he found out that compared to other stones, these were highly sought after. Cilian looked at the other stone and concluded that the work was commendable but far from the dwarf's skill. The prince then asked for these stones to be added to Bertino's master merchants list. Adam reminded the prince that the Duchy of Bertino was the best supplier of diamonds and amethysts. He also asked Cilian if he should find another market for these stones, since all the jewelry stores were already stocked with them. Adam reluctantly asked our heroine's opinion on the matter, and added that this shop was no different from jewelry stores in other cities. Our heroine thought she didn't know how other jewelry stores were, so she figured she should answer that she knew nothing about it. Adam pointed out that the prince had praised her for her frankness and honesty, so he asked her to do the same now. Juliet then said the stones were very pretty, but she was a bit confused. Cilian, for his part, silently observed that girl's responses. Our heroine started by saying that if sellers hide what they want to sell and only show it to those they want to buy, they'll reduce the number of potential buyers, because that's not how business works. Juliet explained her point, saying that jewelry is just a luxury, not a necessity, so to sell these kinds of stones you gotta build a different strategy. So people who initially didn't want to buy anything get tempted and make a deal. Both young men looked confused by this idea, and Adam admitted he hadn't even thought about it because the traditional method could only attract a limited number of buyers. The prince asked the girl how she came up with the idea. Juliet replied that it seemed a shame to hide so much beauty and not show it to anyone. Then she added that people don't appreciate beauty they can't see with their own eyes. The prince was thinking and our heroine looked at him. Now she realized that this guy, unlike others, had never scolded or made fun of her for her looks, even though he was tough, moody, and even abusive. Our heroine realized that Cilian was the only one in this world who didn't judge her by her appearance, and he confirmed that few people can estimate the true value of a diamond before it's been cut. The prince asked Juliet for her opinion on how to display the pieces. Our heroine answered that she'd set the stage, so people could admire these stones and jewels through glass cases, and then added that even someone just passing by wouldn't be able to walk by without checking out the goods. Juliet also emphasized that such preparations would require a lot of expenses, but that would be nothing compared to what they'd earn afterward. She pointed out again that jewelry was the ultimate luxury, so first they had to renovate the place to create an atmosphere of luxury and sophistication, and then present the stones. Our heroine said a prerequisite was having polite and attentive employees selling the merchandise. Juliet said a customer choosing a product in a store should feel like the most special person in the world. She said that in the future she'd like to open a store that made people want to buy the products it sells. Our heroine also admitted that her dream was to help others dream. The prince, at least, was deeply shocked because he saw our heroine as a normal, ordinary girl, from whom he obviously didn't expect something like this. At the same time, he realized that when she talked about all this, she shined so much she seemed more beautiful than any actress. Cilian declared it an excellent idea and suggested they discuss it over dinner. That night, the count noticed the prince was deep in thought and asked what he was thinking about. Cilian asked Adam again, and he told the prince that if he liked that ugly girl so much, he should just sleep with her and hoped the prince wouldn't show it in his behavior. The count reminded his friend that he was the man who would eventually take the throne. Adam was worried that if rumors spread that the prince liked a girl with that look, they'd roast him, and it'd turn into his Achilles heel. And then he remembered people loved clowning on his tastes and stirring up all kinds of drama. Cilian laughed back and asked his buddy if he really thought he was head over heels for some maid. Adam said he'd be super happy if that wasn't the case, and he was wrong. The latter said our heroine was actually good at business and then added he didn't need her, especially with her looks that could mess up his image. The prince told the count not to judge her appearance and explained she worked hard, had no selfish goals, and was smart, and stressed he wasn't going to kick her out just because she was ugly. Adam had to accept the prince's wishes and said he wouldn't say another word about his maid. The count dared to give the prince one more piece of advice, and this time asked him to get the Marquis Anais' daughter on his side. Cilian asked the count why he was doing that, and if it was to compete with his brother Adam, then said the Marquis was neutral. And if his daughter married Francisco, she'd have no choice but to side with him, so they had to stop that before she could make a move. To his friend's claim, the prince replied he hadn't decided yet if he'd become emperor. Adam said if he didn't make that move, no one would dare oppose Prince Francisco. The count also pointed out that if that happened, the first prince wouldn't leave him alone. Finally, our travelers arrived at Ricalen, the capital of the Bertino Duchy. Oswald, who was a marquis and Cilian's friend, came out to personally greet the prince. The young man told the prince he looked even better than before, and they said he was even chattier than before. Oswald asked to get a better look at his handsome face, and added he'd put a lot of care and attention into him, then told the prince he wouldn't understand his problems since he was naturally good-looking. Then Oswald turned his attention to our heroine, and asked who that striking girl was. Juliet introduced herself to the Marquis, and said she was temporarily acting as Jeff's assistant. Oswald told our heroine not to worry and emphasized she had a pretty unique look. The Marquis asked Juliet if he could hire her as a maid when Jeff came back. The prince gave Oswald a claw-like glare and asked if he was going to steal his maid, reminding him he had a lot of work to do, and tons of guests to serve. The Marquis agreed with that and asked the prince to take his anger out on Adam. Oswald complained to Cilian that the count ran off as soon as he heard Prince Francisco was coming, defending him. Adam said he just wanted to meet the prince ASAP. Oswald also told the other guy that a lady from the Anais family was already at the residence and added he was super busy because of her, and our heroine thought she'd relaxed too soon and then concluded she'd totally chilled out because they were treating her really well and she thought she couldn't mess up and had to know her place. Our heroine thinks a lady raised with love and care fits this worldview better than a regular maid serving aristocrats. The prince asked Alberto to take care of Juliet and let her rest and feed her, though he later thought it'd be cool to eat together. Albert muttered quietly that the prince had never cared about him as much as he did about our heroine and had only asked him to bring them a light snack. While consulting Oswald, he liked how the prince took care of his maiden, and admitted he wished he got that kind of attention himself. The prince told Oswald that our heroine was hogging his attention, but the young man didn't buy it because he saw himself as a handsome dude, and Juliet read a questioning look on this Marquise's face, like what kind of person was she that didn't fit this harsh, serious picture? And then she saw him say almost between the lines that even if she didn't fit, she still belonged here in the end. Our heroine concluded that even someone so weird works for the prince and wondered why she shouldn't work quietly and decided she needed to trust herself more. Finally, our Juliet headed to the kitchen because she was starving. The room was empty, and decided they probably only met here at certain times, so she thought she'd drop the idea for now. The next moment, a lady arrogantly approached her and asked our heroine what she was doing here, and it immediately clicked that she was Baroness Pamela, the palace's head maid. The girls started whispering about our heroine's looks, and Pamela asked Juliet how it was possible that such a terrible maid was allowed into the palace and asked whose servant she was. Our heroine introduced herself and said she was Lord Bertino's maid. The woman scoffed disdainfully and said Juliet was more like a stain on the prince's rep and didn't believe her words. Then she asked what Alberto was doing and why he wasn't fulfilling his direct duties. Our heroine didn't get why people loved judging and roasting others' looks when they had no right to judge anyone. This time, Juliet decided to stand up for herself and said her host wasn't the type to judge by appearances, then added that sometimes he met people who, like her, felt even more uncomfortable with their looks. Our heroine told Pamela she knew Pamela didn't like her looks, so she'd leave, but the woman got mad that the maid dared to argue with her and promised she'd make sure she lost her job. The maid started murmuring that the butler had been especially picky about the maid's looks and caused a lot of trouble for Pamela. The maids kept laughing at our heroine and hoped she'd really leave and go back to her place. Jeff, because he was the manager's nephew, Pamela decided to report this terrible maid's behavior as a complaint, to then prove the old butler's incompetence. The woman decided to put her nephew in the butler's place, but when things escalated, the prince threateningly asked the head maid how she dared oppose his butler whom he had personally chosen. The woman started making excuses to the prince, saying he misunderstood her. Adam decided to put out the fire, saying our heroine was an emergency substitute because his nephew got injured and suddenly quit the job. Oswald wanted to know the details of how our strange maid poured hot tea on that guy, and the count asked not to dwell on this little incident. When Pamela heard Adam's last words, she got even more pissed. The woman started wondering why our heroine poured tea on her nephew and if it was an accident, to which the count said all the details of what happened had been confirmed and there was no crime, adding that Jeff was already recovering. But the woman didn't calm down and now wondered how they could turn a blind eye to that, stressing she'd immediately prepare another maid for the prince. Pamela also asked His Highness not to forget what she once told him. Oswald asked the hostess to let Alberto handle the matter and focus on her own business. He reminded the lady she was responsible for the upcoming party, and that if there was the slightest mistake, the butler wouldn't let it slide. The argument went on until the prince silenced everyone, asking how much longer he had to listen to this, and ordered the butler out of his sight for a moment. Now let's rewind to what happened a week ago. Recap Manhwa. When Kristen, our heroine's stepsister, went to her mother's room to talk, but the woman told her to stop, thinking she could become the main duchess. By the way, let's meet Marchioness Ivana Anais, who kicked out our little heroine. The woman reminded her daughter of her lineage and added that if she married well, she could boost Prince Francisco's power. The Marchioness asked her daughter if she still believed in her pointless love, even after seeing her father's and her miserable situation. The woman told Kristen that the sight of her stupid face gave her headaches and asked her to leave her alone. After talking to her mother, the girl went to her father's room and told him she wanted to visit the Bertino Duchy with him. Then she said she'd been in love with Prince Cilian since childhood and wanted to see him. Kristen also told the Marquis that she didn't want to be with a man she didn't love. The girl bowed to her father and asked him to marry her off. With the man she loved in her heart, the father showed understanding toward his daughter and asked her not to continue with her confession. The Marquis told Kristen she could go with him to the Bertino Duchy, and the man did this. Because he always felt guilty toward her, he couldn't forgive his wife, so he deprived his kids of their father's love. His resentment towards his wife was because his beloved couldn't handle the loss of their daughter and died. Deciding to follow her, that's at least what he knew. The maid then reported that she had tried to find out where her daughter was buried but couldn't because the woman had already died. The Marquis blamed what happened on his wife, whom he'd married by contract and under the Duke of Dudley's pressure, so there was no love between them. While he was away, Ivana kicked Estella and Juliet out of the house, and now he could only look at their graves. Kristen was born a few months before our heroine, so this girl stirred all kinds of feelings in her heart, from hate to longing and even guilt, and now the man thought maybe he had a shot at fixing things. The Marquis kept thinking more and more about how he could legally break the marriage contract with Ivana and go against the Dudley family. Back to the prince's residence, who approached our heroine's room and noticed it was tiny, even windowless. Juliet said she loved being there and even claimed it was the first time she'd been in such a nice room. With all the comforts, of course. The prince didn't buy it but said nothing. Our heroine noticed uneasily that he didn't seem to mention the incident with her manager and decided he wasn't going to fire her yet. She could still see in her mind the furious Pamela, threatening to destroy her. The prince kept thinking he wanted to fix and sort everything out, but now doubted if he should be glad that our heroine was satisfied with everything here. Then he concluded Juliet was very modest and got even happier to have finally found a maid he liked. Then he remembered that luckily there were boring people who didn't like. Our heroine asked the prince when the gala dinner would be and even suggested they start prepping. Cilian then recalled how the head maid said she'd get unnecessarily nervous if our heroine came. The prince replied he'd go alone to the event and then asked the girl if she'd eaten and what she'd like to eat. So our heroine decided to take a walk in the garden and think about what was going on with the prince and why he suddenly started caring so much about her when before he just did what he was told. Then she decided she could eat well anyway because she was almost starving. Juliet strolled through the garden, thinking it had been a long time since she'd had such a free day and enjoying life at that moment. She felt drunk on the freshness of the evening air and remembered her conversation with the prince. She thought that even if her room seemed small to the prince's eyes, she'd moved from the tiny prop room to the youngest maid's room. Now she had a table and a bed in her room and was happy with the space. Our heroine was even more pleased, because if she kept working this hard she'd soon pay off her debts. Suddenly someone called our heroine. Juliet saw an unknown girl who asked if she was really the prince's new maid, then asked if she was going to dinner. Juliet noticed the girl wasn't wearing plebeian clothes, and figured she must hold a high position like head maid. The girl explained that if she didn't have time to eat in the servants' house, she had to go to the main building's dining hall. The stranger explained how meals and dinners were organized in the palace and offered to help the girl. Our unsuspecting heroine sincerely thanked her. Juliet started wondering who this exceptional person was who didn't judge by looks, and thought the girl was really nice. Then she got a déjà vu feeling, and thought she'd been through this before but hadn't listened to her inner voice. When they passed through the main palace entrance, our heroine asked why they kept going, and the girl told her the servants' entrance was on the other side. Suddenly, another lady joined their group with her face covered by a veil in front of our heroine. The second stranger complained to the first and slapped her hard. Juliet rushed to help her companion and asked if she was okay. Moments later, the guard arrived at the noise and a confrontation broke out. Our heroine announced that a woman had approached them, started yelling, then hit her companion, and then ran off in that direction. The girl kept crying and sobbing, saying she didn't understand what was going on either. And then, to our heroine's surprise, this beaten young woman told the guards that our heroine was lying, because she had hit her. Then she stood up and pointed her finger at Juliet. Our heroine asked the girl what she was talking about, and even suggested it might be shock. Juliet asked the girl to look at her and remember she hadn't hit her. But swords were already at our heroine's neck. The guards asked the victim again if Juliet really hit her, and she answered yes. The lying girl said she had accompanied our heroine to the dining hall, and that as soon as they reached the main door she was dragged and started getting hit. Then the girl turned to Juliet and said she was the daughter of Viscount Seister, and asked how she dared to hit her, then added it was unforgivable and she'd be punished. Our heroine asked back why the Viscount's daughter was lying to her now. She looked at our heroine and mentally confirmed she wasn't guilty but had no other choice. The day before, Baroness Pamela had intercepted her in the hallway and told her that if she helped deal with our heroine they could get a lot of things. Specifically, the manager was going to fire the butler and promised her a position as the prince's maid, and concluded that this way they'd have all the power in their hands, which was exactly what this person really wanted. Sylvia ordered the guards to take our heroine to the appropriate place. Christian, meanwhile, was courting the prince and making sure his preferred dinner was ready. The girl also praised the palace cook's skills. Kristen kept babbling that on her estate, they also had a chef who made unique dishes and invited the prince to visit her place someday. Amid loud grumbles from her helpers, the prince said he'd let her know when he had time, though he wanted to decline the invite immediately. Kristen thanked Cilian for inviting her to tonight's party, even reaching out to touch her hand to show special affection, and went on, saying it'd be nice if they could hang out more often. The prince didn't like her touching him, and Oswald saw it, so he quickly jumped in to grab attention. The prince declared firmly that now that they'd eaten, they could go to the study and talk business. Oswald stressed the urgency and immediately decided to switch things up. Once in the study, the count praised the prince for his moderation and for taking advice. Adam asked the prince to keep up the same spirit until Prince Francisco arrived, since so far everything was going well. Cilian said she was glad someone was in a good mood. Oswald reminded them they hadn't agreed last time, and that things needed to get done. Adam started by saying they should follow our heroine's advice and tear down the tent wall and put glass in its place. The prince ordered them to do it in their tents, in all the cities. Cilian, ordered to be informed about everything but the helpers, said they'd be super busy hiring people and building new buildings. Oswald told his buddy he was really surprised to see all the capital's people wearing last year's outdated jewels and clothes that had been popular last year. He started lamenting that no one could please his eyes with beautiful modern clothes. Moments later, the crowd noticed a worried butler, who immediately headed to the prince. Moments later, Albert told Cilian that Juliet had been arrested for hitting the aristocrat. Oswald and Adam tried to get the details, but the butler just repeated that our heroine had hit someone and that it was a titled lady. Later, Albert, he found out she was the daughter of the Viscount's second daughter. Sylvia, the butler, told the prince that the girl had identified Juliet at the crime scene, so she was immediately arrested. Cilian then asked who dared to lock up his personal assistant, drew his sword, and ordered him to come back with him right away. Adam started stopping the prince, saying it was unacceptable for the prince to go down to the underground prison just because of a maid. Cilian asked Adam if the person who'd been with him the whole time could really be considered a servant. The prince asked the count if he should consider each of them his servant, then asked his friend if he was tired of living. The friend dropped to his knees and said he didn't dare go against his highness's will, then added that even he couldn't do anything because the maid had hit the aristocrat. Adam explained that our heroine had broken the law and asked the prince if he really wanted the whole aristocracy to rise up against him. But Cilian announced they all needed to calm down first, because he intended to find out every detail of the case and said there was probably someone else behind the whole thing. Then he asked the count if he really wanted to die by his hand. Adam reminded the prince of his own words that he felt nothing for the girl. The count also added that if he was willing to kill his loyal subject and close friend over this maid, he was free to do whatever he wanted. The prince told the count to stand up and warned him not to dare look down on his people from now on. Cilian told Oswald to find out more about the aristocrat who'd been hit and everything about her family. The young man immediately offered to persuade the girl to give another testimony, and then suggested that if the first prince was involved, the case could end badly. Our prince asked us to find out everything first, and also to keep in mind any possible witnesses to the incident. He said it'd be good to find them, otherwise there'd be extra problems in the trial. The prince tasked Adam with finding out where Duke Martin was, and asked him to bring the duke to the palace without being seen. The butler got instructions from the prince to prepare a room for this duke next to the count's. Adam Cilian told the public that if their enemies were going to make our heroine a scapegoat, they'd better prepare a fake witness. When night fell, Oswald decided to stop the prince, but the prince asked him not to. Oswald for his part asked the prince not to confuse him with the count, adding that he wasn't that kind of guy and confessed he was just worried the prince hadn't brought a sword. The market also suggested the prince take a shortcut and agreed to show him the way. Cilian suggested to his friend that he must have studied all the shortcuts to escape unnoticed and was snapped at with resentment. Oswald pointed out that the moonlight was as bright as the sun tonight and said it was nice to take a walk on such a beautiful night. The young man also asked his friend to finally make a fateful decision and then added that, although the emperor loved and supported him a lot, he still hadn't thrown his hat in the ring for the throne. Oswald also explained to the prince that if he kept refusing a situation like today's would happen more and more often. He also stressed that next time either he or Adam would be the victims even if he managed to save his maid. Oswald insisted a lot that our prince was going to be the future emperor and our heroine was sitting in a cage wondering what she hadn't gotten from the Viscount's daughter, who decided to set her up like this. Juliet suggested maybe she was also thinking of becoming the prince's personal maid. The girl was indescribably sad at that moment and also very hungry but wondered what she had done in her past life to have to pay so many times now. Juliet also thought the dog who sent her here had told her he'd save her from a hard life. So now she called him a bastard. All these thoughts made her fall into a kind of stupor. Suddenly she saw the prince and immediately asked if he had come to rescue her. Juliet immediately asked Cilian if he had found out she wasn't the one, and added that she didn't know the reasons behind the girl's behavior. The prince then said the case was still pending and promised he'd free her by tomorrow afternoon. Our heroine broke down crying and hugged the prince, saying he was the best, then claimed he hadn't actually hit the girl and asked her to believe him. The prince was stunned for a moment, then hugged Juliet himself. Oswald witnessed the whole scene, and once again was convinced that this maiden wasn't just any ordinary girl, because the prince wouldn't have cared so much about her otherwise. Our heroine asked the prince to leave since it had been a long time. As he said goodbye, Cilian added that she just needed to be patient and she'd be free again. The next morning, Cilian visited Kristen and told her she'd heard the news about her maid, so she was worried about him. The prince just confirmed the news had spread fast and thanked her for her concern, then said he was super busy and asked her to leave. She thought his reaction was expected and knew well that she couldn't get his attention like that. Then Kristen dropped the line that she'd been at the scene yesterday, and of course it worked. Aeneas the Marquis's daughter told the prince she could vouch that her maid hadn't done any of that. Cilian immediately asked if she'd witnessed the incident, but the girl shook her head no and said if she had been there she would have stepped in right away. Kristen emphasized she just didn't want anyone interfering and messing with His Majesty at such a crucial moment in his life. The girl announced she'd stake her family's honor for him and act as a false witness. Silvio asked bluntly why she'd do that. Kristen said it was simply her choice, or more like a genuine impulse from her heart. She stressed that if her help was useful, she hoped he'd remember her later. The prince thanked Kristen and said he understood her intentions, then asked her to leave. Oswald said if Duke Martin didn't arrive in time, this would be a solid backup plan. He even suggested this girl would fit perfectly as a future wife if he ever wanted to get married. Then he added with a smirk, looking at the prince with a sly glance, "That is, if you don't already have someone else in mind for the role." Sylvia went to Pamela with the news that her father had arrived at the palace and told her she shouldn't have shared what happened, especially if it wasn't true. The governess objected and said if the Viscount stepped in, the matter would be resolved quickly and smoothly. Then she told her to be patient and play the innocent victim. Then the woman reminded her they both knew it was too late to back out now. A new carriage arrived at the palace and the guards thought it was the Marquis's servant. Oswald and the knights also discussed that the prince had summoned everyone involved in the incident, and even the Viscount of Sister had come here. In the palace's common room, the victim was finally presented. The prince asked her to say if our heroine had really started hitting her for no reason since he kindly decided to take her to the dining hall. Sylvia gave her fake testimony and confirmed that she was just as simple and kind as Juliet had attacked. Viscount Sither yelled at the prince asking why the dirty maid wasn't in the room and his daughter was being questioned like a criminal. The prince asked the butler to tell what he knew. Albert then declared that the maid who was arrested claimed a woman dressed in black appeared and started hitting the lady out of nowhere, then ran away. Sylvia immediately said that was a lie because a woman walking around in black can't go unnoticed in the palace. The girl went on telling the prince that the maiden thought too highly of herself because she was her personal servant, and added that our heroine supposedly told her she was different from the others, then admitted she tried to give her advice, but got slapped in the face. The prince asked the victim if her helper had hit her so hard that she had those bruises. At that moment, Sylvia looked the prince in the eyes and saw a look that said he didn't believe a word she was saying. The Viscount spoke again and said that seeing his daughter in that state, I had no doubt about what had happened. The offended father suggested that maybe the prince wanted to avoid a scandal. Because our heroine had, and it didn't end there because Oswald stepped in at this point. He asked everyone to pay attention to the fact that the prince never turns a blind eye to wrongdoing. Oswald added that maybe some people here didn't know, but the prince doesn't overlook sins, not even among his own. At this point, the prince said he would never forgive anyone who dared to lie to him. Oswald took the floor again and said that since both sides were saying different things, he asked for a few more words for himself. At that moment, the prince thought the duke was dragging it out and they couldn't wait any longer. He wanted to figure out who had set this trap for our heroine. Cilian didn't get what sense it made to kill his assistant, and Oswald said he had a witness who could end this whole thing. Pamela was all gloomy because she didn't expect anyone. At that moment, Oswald announced that the witness was Duke Martin. The day before, Adam had hidden this man under the seat so he could get past the carriage guard. He expressed to his son the hope that he wouldn't be stuck in that box forever. Adam told the duke he was in good health, so there shouldn't be any problem. Oswald's servant was alert and told him not to worry, because he'd get out and back to his spot without being seen. The guards knew this servant often ran errands for the Marquis, related to his constant clothing whims. Adam hurriedly put on the groom's outfit, thinking no one would suspect him. Meanwhile, the Duke showed up as a witness and said he was feeling unwell and had been in bed all day, but then found out the prince was about to give a verdict on the incident, so he decided to come. The prince asked the man how he was feeling now, and in between said he'd been worried about his condition since yesterday. The Duke. Martin suggested maybe the long trip had tired him out. Then he turned to the prince to say he had something to say about the incident. The Duke said he'd seen the knights, rushed to the scene so he thought the situation was resolved, then added that he'd heard another story about what he'd seen before falling asleep while standing by the window. A man admitted he saw a woman dressed in black start hitting another maid and then run away. Oswald asked the Duke if he understood that this now backed up the prince's assistant's testimony. The prince also asked if he could believe that the Viscount of Seister's daughter had been hit by anyone other than her maid, and the Duke answered yes, saying he thought the girls must have had a fight. The prince turned to Sylvia and asked her to explain this twist. The Viscount asked his daughter to clarify the situation and told the prince there had been a misunderstanding. The girl shivered then and said shyly that the night was dark and she suddenly got hit in the back of the head. The prince asked her why she was giving a different testimony when just a moment ago she'd said the exact opposite, and said she'd been hit in the face and even showed bruises. Cilian said, addressing the victim, that if she confessed, honestly he'd let her family live, and told her to stop testing his patience. Pamela saw the whole situation and now just hoped Sylvia wouldn't snitch on her. The leader mentally begged her accomplice to try to think of something and get out of this mess. She did by fainting to the floor. The Viscount shouted and the prince announced that he and his daughter would be locked up in the palace from that moment on until all the circumstances of the case were cleared up. The prince also added that they wouldn't be allowed to have contact with anyone during that time. Cilian ordered them to be taken away and to be informed as soon as the criminal woke up. As he was leaving, the prince whispered to the Marquis of Anais if he knew his daughter had approached him to offer something. The Marquis turned to his daughter and asked her directly what His Highness was saying. Sylvia was taken to the guest room and kept pretending to be unconscious. She thought it was good she'd faked passing out and decided the Baroness should help her. Pamela. He came to check on his partner and saw that she looked bad. The woman started whining about the prince's cold-blooded way of treating someone in such a state. Sylvia didn't see anything but felt like something had stabbed her. The girl noticed she was sinking into a weird state, and that she was getting more and more unable to hear others. Our heroine went back to her room and took off her dirty clothes. Thinking the servant's bathroom was way too far, Juliet was also worried, because she didn't know what would happen to her wandering around the palace, so she used the prince's bathroom. Our heroine thought she should freshen up before the prince arrived, and Cilian was lost in his own thoughts. And his thoughts were that maybe the emperor wanted to make him crown Prince ASAP. But on the other hand, he didn't want to give up his current life, where he just handled the duchy's management and trade. He remembered our heroine and thought that except for once, he'd never let anyone take what was his, thinking he didn't know whose tricks those were. The prince started worrying that could happen in the future, tired and stressed out. The young man decided he needed a bath and some chill time before resting. When Cilian entered the bathroom, he wondered why it was so wet and froze when he saw our heroine's bare legs. Juliet immediately ran to grab her glasses and they asked how long the prince had been out of jail. The prince grabbed her hand and asked her to show her eyes, but our heroine realized he was about to expose her, so she covered her face with her hands. The prince thought she must be crying and then remembered he had promised to get her out of there. At that moment, our heroine realized he hadn't caught her but was just worried about some random servant. Juliet, pretty tired, asked to be allowed in to get dressed. She was glad she'd put on the wig beforehand. Our heroine explained to the prince what had happened trying to clean the bathroom that looked terribly dirty and took off her clothes so she wouldn't get dirty. Cilian expressed his relief that she was okay and generally fine, and our heroine kept mentally searching for answers to why that guy was so sweet to her and figured he was definitely up to no good. The prince decided our heroine probably hadn't eaten anything and came closer to her, then said he'd tell the butler to bring food to the room and asked our heroine to rest by his side. That night, the girl felt the danger of intimacy and even found this whole situation kind of weird. In fact, the prince came up with an interception plan, which was basically that he wanted Juliet to be his so no one could snatch her away. Right then, Oswald burst into the room and announced they had an emergency. The Marquis said Lady Seyster was having some problems with her body. Then he saw our couple and figured he'd come at the worst time. Oswald apologized and then said it was a super urgent matter and hoped they'd understand his behavior. The young man explained Sylvia was paralyzed all over and was being checked by a doctor. The prince asked for Adam to be called and Oswald ordered a guard assigned to the Marquis of Anais and to keep an eye on Cilian. He also ordered the perimeter guards to be reinforced and that everyone make sure no rat sneaked in through the doors. Then the prince asked our heroine to eat and rest. Juliet looked at him and thought how someone could change so fast in a moment, and remembered how, just a bit ago, she'd felt overwhelmed by a sense of danger and even thought she couldn't imagine such a demon of a man could exist in real life. The Duke of Cilian arrived at the castle and was immediately informed of the news, so he went to see the prince. Worth mentioning, this guy was the emperor's maternal cousin and confidant. Cilian told the Duke he was super busy and couldn't spare time but just expressed regret for not coming sooner to help his nephew. The man told the prince he was going to rest and that when he was free, they could meet. The Duke turned to his assistant and asked if this was the girl they'd held in the dungeon. The young man answered yes and then added that a maid recommended by the Countess would arrive soon. The Duke of Cilian was happy and said he was glad there were no delays and suggested that our heroine surely wouldn't turn down his offer, and to understand his plans we have to go back 2 months to when a meeting took place at the Maribel Theatre. The theatre director was visited by the Duke himself to talk with her. Then he asked the woman to find a young lady with golden hair and green eyes. The director replied that it was extremely hard to find a girl like that and asked the Duke why he needed such a candidate. The visitor openly shared his secret with Maribel. Knowing she was good at keeping secrets, the woman admitted she'd held that position for decades precisely because she instantly forgot whatever she heard. Then the Duke said he needed a stand-in for his daughter and added that after his wife's death his daughter moved to a village and grew up there. Maribel knew this situation and knew his daughter had no contact with other girls her age while everyone wanted her to debut in high society. The Duke admitted that actually his daughter was very weak and spent most of her time in bed with a book or staring out the window at the scenery. The man guessed that if this kept up, since the only heir was sick, his duchy would be split among distant relatives. The Duke also stressed that if they forgot the title after his death, his daughter could be killed by a new Duke they didn't even know. Maribel replied that he was insanely lucky because the Duke wouldn't have to keep searching for a blonde with green eyes. The woman then said she knew a girl who fit that description perfectly. The theater director thought this offer would be good for our heroine and better than spending her life pretending to be a maid because it's easier to live as a Duke's daughter, even if she's not the real one. The woman told the Duke she had seen his wife from afar, Recap Manhwa, when she was still alive and had heard that his daughter resembled her mother. The man confirmed her words, adding that's why he wanted a girl with golden hair and green eyes. The Duke explained that was a distinctive trait of the Anais family which his wife belonged to. Then Maribel, in response to this big secret, decided to share what she'd been hiding for 10 years and asked her interlocutor if he knew the Marquis had a daughter out of wedlock. And the Duke answered yes, then added he also knew she died with her mother. The director replied that indeed, that illegitimate daughter was in her care and she had hidden her identity all those years by the Marquis' orders. And now back to our heroine, who was outraged by Alberto's statement. The butler replied that an order is an order and thought maybe the prince was really sick for some reason. The man repeated that yesterday after the meeting. The prince had called him to his room and said Juliet would soon become his concubine, and at the meeting the topic was this. They discussed the best way to stage Sylvia's suicide, especially considering that anyway this girl couldn't say anything. The prince also suggested she was clearly a puppet of someone following the orders of her puppeteer. Cilian told his partners to watch the manager, since she was the main suspect in his eyes, and asked them to be alert for any strange contact or activity. When his brother arrived, the prince looked at his notes and called his butler. The prince told Alberto that from now on, whenever he was alone with our heroine in his room, no one would be allowed to enter without warning. Cilian also said that when they returned to the mansion, he would give her a place in the castle and asked the butler to make the necessary arrangements. The man bowed and said he would do whatever the prince asked. Now Alberto told our heroine that as soon as this happened, her new title would be officially announced, which left the girl stunned. Juliet stopped the horses and said she actually didn't want any of that, which surprised the butler, who immediately started wondering why our heroine was rejecting such an opportunity. Our heroine explained to the man at the estate that she was the prince's personal maid, and that she had seen everything that could be seen and even what couldn't be seen. Then she asked the butler if he really wanted something to happen between them like what went down in those rooms. Juliet had already told Tony Tolbert 3 times that kids these days move way too fast and all that. But she wasn't feeling it at the moment. The butler thought about how he'd report this to his master, and even suggested reminding the prince of how he used to live. In the end, Alberto turned to our heroine and said he got what she was trying to say, then added that His Highness was away on a business trip for a house competition and offered to talk about everything once he got back, and the girl at that moment wondered if her refusal would play any role in how this whole thing got sorted. The girl remembered again how she and her mom had been kicked out on the streets and thought she wasn't happy with any title. Our heroine expressed hope that the prince could be persuaded and then added that otherwise, she'd have no choice but to submit. Juliet also asked the butler when the prince would return and found out he had to inspect all the house's hunting grounds and would be back tomorrow afternoon. Now our heroine realized why he'd been so nice to her lately, and started wondering if that was his way of trying to force her to become his concubine. Juliet was also sure that if that stubborn prince had made up his mind, it'd be impossible to change it. And that's how the girl got to the point where she decided to run away from the palace. The duke's assistant noticed our heroine and told his lord that maybe the very maid they were looking for was passing by. The duke confirmed it was indeed the girl he'd seen in Baden County. The man analyzed the situation and tried to figure out why she was leaving the palace while the prince had gone out with his entourage to explore the hunting grounds. Anyway, the duke decided this was the perfect chance, so he stopped and invited our heroine to hop into the carriage. The man said they were on their way and decided to take her, which our heroine appreciated. The duke also told the girl that he'd been wanting to talk to her and suggested maybe it was fate playing its hand. Then added he'd heard news from the theater director. Juliet got super scared and wondered why Maribel had betrayed her and was trying to sell her off to that old aristocrat while she was paying her debt on time. And the duke, at that moment, told her he didn't know what she was thinking, but she shouldn't be afraid the next moment. Our heroine heard he was willing to offer her a job that couldn't even compare to her current one as a maid. Juliet tried to clear things up and asked if she'd understood correctly that she was going to play the role of his daughter who had all the rights as the sole heir. Since she was in poor health, the duke realized our girl was sharp and explained that it was aristocratic season and that his daughter's debut had to be a success and she had to do everything possible to be accepted as the heir of his family, so our heroine was going to get a fat paycheck, and Juliet guessed with that money. Recap manhwa, she could pay off all Maribel's debts and even open her own shop. Our heroine thought maybe luck had finally turned her way, so now wasn't the time to be scared and back down consumed by fear. The girl asked the duke to sign a contract with the terms as well as the exact date and amount, and the added clause that she wouldn't suffer any harm once the deal was done. Our heroine agreed to this adventure because she realized that once she played this role, she could finally enjoy a free life.